Good morning, and welcome to The Crawl, the show where we break down the future of search, brand authority, and everything else AI is rewriting about digital marketing. I'm Tristan Harris, your host, and today we're chatting with the founder, Executive Chairman of Vidmob, Alex Collmer, on AI at scale, creativity, risk, and what marketers are missing. Alex Collmer is the founder and Executive Chairman of Vidmob, a creative data company helping brands and agencies improve marketing performance through AI-powered creative intelligence. An entrepreneur with a background in engineering, digital media, and gaming, he founded Vidmob in 2015 and has helped establish creative data as a critical component of modern marketing and media decision-making. Collmer is also a member of the Meta Global Creative Council and the Executive Committee for Media and Data at MMA Global. So thank you, Alex, first of all, for taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure. It's good to be here, Tristan.
I saw on your site that Vidmob has analyzed millions of creative assets. So what's the biggest change you've seen since generative AI entered the mainstream?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think probably the way I would phrase it is, there's a couple exercises here. There's one is sort of like analyzing the data. And then the second piece is then, what do you do with that? Like how do you put it into action to drive, value? So it's not just some sort of insight that you look at and you're like, oh, that's interesting. So, on the first part, I think just getting into kind of like, what it means when we say creative data and like, how do we sort of like build the data? That process effectively, it means that our customers, so, generally kind of large global, advertisers, think, Coca-Cola, brands like that, they will give our software access to effectively all of their ad accounts, ever in the world. So, all their, Meta and TikTok and, Google and Amazon and, LinkedIn and on and on. And when they give it access, it does really sort of two things. Like first, it takes, all of the creative assets that they've run. So, to your point, the millions of assets. And increasingly, these large marketers, they don't just have a handful. They have like tens, if not hundreds of thousands of assets kind of in the wild at any point in time. So it takes all those, looks back over the course of 13 months. We start with sort of like a historical record of performance, and then literally goes asset by asset and pushes it through like hundreds of models to break down and understand like all the creative decisions that are happening inside of a, let's just say 10-second Instagram ad. And, what's interesting there is it isn't just like, is there a logo, is there a call to action, a couple of, simple things like that. Like you're literally talking about like tens of thousands of data points per like 10-second Instagram ad.
Wow.
And at least theoretically, what we're going to get to is a holistic and total understanding of creative decisioning. So like all everything you need to know about the benefit messaging and the narrative architecture and, on and on and on. And that is where you start to get to like real scale, because you're taking not just millions of ads, but millions of ads crossed with like tens of thousands of data points per. And then we compare that to all the behavior signals that those marketers care about. So, they could be all the sort of media metrics coming back via the platform ads APIs, or it could be like upper funnel brand metrics or real, lower funnel, sales metrics. I just got back from the MMA, summit yesterday, and the head of media for Kroger was presenting how we were able to help them understand how to drive like e-commerce, conversion through that. So like that's what we think about as creative data. It's sort of like the holistic understanding of creativity, which is a lot of data, coupled with the, many hundreds of different like outcomes that they care about, and then creating an analytic environment where they can sort of, cross those two and start to understand how does every single creative decision impact every single outcome that I care about. And then you can go even further. It's like, how does it vary by platform, by format, by audience? So it starts to get pretty, the scale gets pretty significant pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think the point of in a short, Instagram ad, there could be tens of thousands of data points that you're consuming and tracking and using to help inform, future creative decisions. It's really, really interesting. That's not something that we've ever been able to do in the past. It's definitely something that 10 years ago, I think would be very, very difficult to do. I was running ads back then, and I run them now, um, and it was a lot more based on experience and vibes than
Yep.
hard quantitative data.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's sort of been the way of the industry for a while, and I think sort of as a result, because the media side was more math oriented,
Mhm.
it sort of lent itself in the early part of this sort of like digital media revolution here to have basically all the technology built on the media side. So if you think about like sort of ad tech, as a
Yeah.
category and the thousands of companies there, they're pretty much all focused on the aggregation and utilization of identity data to drive better targeting.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and that obviously has led to kind of $1 trillion digital media universe. But what's interesting is like literally every marketer you talk to will tell you that creative is at least 50% responsible for performance.
Yep.
So it's like all the focus has been on sort of like the small side. And it's just that technology now is starting to get us, put us in a position where, as a category or as an industry, we can start to bring some math to the bigger side too.
That's really interesting. And I think a lot of that is driven by the fact that there's always a drive for quantifiable metrics when it comes to reporting, right? For example, if I'm spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a month or a year on ad campaigns, you need to be able to point to, well, here is how we've refined our targeting based on the data we've seen, and here's how we're trying to improve. Where, you're right, the creative side is, I would argue, even more than half of the game, where you can target your audience perfectly, but if your creative's not aligning with them and not, driving an emotional response or a human connection with them, then you're running into an issue where, you're wasting all of that money, and you're getting results that are much, much less than what they should be, or what you need them to be. So, question for you, since we're talking about like the data side of it, right? Um, how do you kind of combine those data points and the kind of learnings that you're gleaning from tracking all of those data points and use that to inform creative decision making?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the first part is getting to an understanding of for a brand, what are the drivers of the outcomes that they care about. Right? So it's like first you have to understand, and then you can apply. And so when we're working with customers, there's often kind of like what we think is like a maturity journey. Um, we sort of start with the sort of known platform best practices. Like Google has their ABCDs, and Meta
Hmm.
has their brilliant basics, and these are sort of generic, logo in the first 3 seconds, have a strong call to action, things like
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
that kind of in general applied across tens of millions of advertisers tend to be beneficial. Now, they are a good place to start, but they're not much more than that, right?
yeah,
Because, obviously LVMH is going to be very different than Geico. And if they're
yeah,
using the same creative best practices, like first of all, that can't, make sense. And second, to assume that the best practices today are the same as they were a year ago, like we also inherently know that can't be right either. Like, culture moves and the way we feel about
yeah,
certain, either, audio or visual triggers changes. So what we do is we sort of align and figure out, all right, hey, marketer, what is it that is your North Star outcome that you're trying to drive? Is it, more, you know, more, clicks to your site? Is it more ROAS? Is it, e-commerce conversions, or, whatever it is? Once we know what that is, then we can determine what are the guidelines that drive that. And just because it's really, fresh in my mind, um, at this, the MMA summit yesterday, we were with the head of media for Kroger, and she presented work we did with them, and they had aligned that for them, for Kroger, what mattered was driving e-commerce conversions for both existing customers, like sort of current households, and then new households. So then once we knew that was kind of like their North Star metric, We went through, looked back over a year's worth of performance. We looked on Google properties and Meta properties, and we went from a little over 200 sort of high level creative guidelines, narrowed it down to some sort of 100 or so that were kind of like statistically significant, and then down to about 23 that were like specific and consistent for them. And then based on that, we built sort of like a predictive model. From there, we were able to pre-flight, like before a dollar was spent on any asset, predict its performance for them. And what we found was that their like higher scoring creative converted at nearly 6x the rate on Google, and a little under 3x on Meta versus lower scoring. So like the the difference in performance for the metric they cared about between high scoring and low scoring was in aggregate about over 4x. So like massive difference.
Yeah.
But and this is the big kicker. They were spending more than half of their media on low scoring creative.
And I think
so
and I think that's something that happens across the industry, right? Because especially with the advent of being able to just, throw out a bunch of creatives utilizing AI and, be able to have so much bigger scale, I've seen a lot of ad teams do an approach where they're like, instead of trying to analyze this data that's hard to get, that we didn't have before something like Vidmob came around, they are instead saying, we're just going to throw out, 200 different creatives. We're going to put a budget behind all of them, and whatever happens to convert over the test period best is going to be what we run with. And they're not taking into account those things like, what kind of commonalities between those ads, address the target audience, and address those KPIs that they care about the most. So I think that's, incredible. And I know I interrupted you there, but I think that, being able to point to that and say, this is a bigger problem now than it kind of ever was before because of generative AI and because people can do this at a much larger scale now.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. And I think that is, sort of, I think the interesting point is that like everything's kind of changing now with AI, both on the ability to sort of get to interesting insights, what used to take sort of, data scientists and creative analysts and a fair amount of work to get to, we can now basically connect our MCP to, Claude or, ChatGPT or, any agentic tool that someone's building, and you basically get those insights sort of instantly, and they're really, really good.
Yeah.
But then once you have them, they can be connected as, sort of like a recommendation engine into any of those generative tools to help like sort of inform them on what to make. Because, we're sort of quickly getting to this point where, there's literally hundreds of, generative tools. And if it's not true now, it will be soon. They can basically make anything you want, sort of instantly and effectively for free. So where like value is shifting is to knowing really specifically like kind of what to make to drive performance. And I think like that sort of gets to this point is like, what is the right level of personalization? Because, just because you can create millions of assets doesn't necessarily mean that you should.
Yes, exactly.
And so understanding like, what is the right level of creative variance is I think it's sort of like a key part of the exercise.
Yeah. And I think that, to go back to the larger discussion for the podcast, I think that what we're seeing is a lot of changes, focus on efficiency that are instead having a negative impact on, actual performance. So, for example, using AI generated creatives, we've seen it create brand safety issues. We've seen it create, a lot of mistakes when brands have kind of fully handed over creative production to AI. And a lot of that is taking off that element of, trying to kind of safeguard the creatives to have that human connection. And a lot of that is something that, I've seen missed on our own end, which is not surprising. And I think part of it is due to, like you said, kind of like a lack of data points around that you can then kind of feed back into the machine. Remind me too after this to connect you with our ad vendor that helps us kind of oversee all our ads, because I think I would be very interested in digging into this and seeing how we can improve on our end, because we've done a lot of, what I think a lot of people in the industry have done, which is, all right, well, let's create a bunch of ads using AI and let's test them and let's see what resonates and what doesn't. And we try to keep it close to our brand. And, we've got a couple companies under our umbrella, and some of them are more playful and we can do some more fun stuff that seems to resonate well with the audience. But then we fall short on the ones that are, less exciting, right? That are kind of more focused on, B2B, not really fun content or subject matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we sort of see a couple things. I mean, first of all, people dramatically overlook brand and the importance of brand marketing.
Yeah.
I think it's really easy to overfocus on sort of performance messages, and we've seen a lot of research showing that sort of some degree of brand advertising actually fairly dramatically accelerates the impact of your performance marketing. And it makes sense, right? Like, I mean, like, yeah, you sort of mentioned in your opening, like, yeah, I sort of came from the games business,
Mhm.
and one of the things that we sort of saw as a category was like games industry did the kind of exactly what you're talking about for a long, like we're really early, adopters of sort of the Facebook universe, and just
Mhm.
this idea, it's like just make a bunch of stuff, throw it at the algorithm, let it figure it out.
Yeah.
And so you ended up with like tons and tons of game ads that all looked kind of the same.
Mhm.
And, the
Yep.
job, and they were being optimized against driving app installs. And they succeeded in doing that, and as a category, we spent, hundreds of billions of dollars, in Facebook's universe doing that. But like, what was left? Yeah. And the games industry is struggling now.
Yeah.
And so I think that the challenge is, and we sort of see this with, if you're, I don't know, let's say you look at like tons and tons of creator led assets
Mhm.
for L'Oreal, Elf, Estee Lauder, et cetera. If they all look the same at a distance, my question is,
Yeah.
what's the impact that those are going to have? And
Yeah.
and the same with these kind of like effectively kind of templatized Gen AI
Mhm.
ads, where it's like,
Yep.
yeah, you're creating a bunch of stuff, but are you actually driving the memorable impact that matters?
I think the one that I see the most that illustrates that are the terrible slot apps, right? That are like, a casino app for your phone. And it's all the same, very templated, flashy AI commercials across like, 30 or 40 different apps. And maybe they're all owned by the same company and, they're just reskinned or something along those lines. But that's something I've seen quite a bit. And I think it's interesting. You've got to start on that side. So just a little history of myself. My first job was working in an app development company that they didn't do, game apps on phones, but they did official apps for like some big games like DC Universe Online and Planet Side and stuff like that back in the day. And so shout out to
Nice.
AppBurst. It gave me
Yeah.
my first start in the professional world. Um, and yeah, and I've got another friend who actually, I won't name, but he works heavily in that industry, and he's told me a lot about how some of the like match 3 games, which I think are like the Candy Crush kind of equivalent games and stuff
Yep.
like that, how it's like very cutthroat, the advertising side of it, because it's so difficult to acquire on a freemium game, through ads, especially like the margins are so thin. So it's very, very interesting.
It's good business for Meta, though.
Yeah, very good business for Meta.
Yeah, and I think what's sort of interesting is like you get into that idea like that you sort of create a million ads, and and from that one's going to be great. And I remember years ago reading Nassim Taleb's Fooled by Randomness, and he had this quote in there. He's like, if you give a million monkeys a typewriter, one of them will write the Iliad.
Yeah.
And I think there's sort of two things from there. The first is like if that's your approach to ad creation, you're still going to have everyone's going to have to watch and see the other 999,000. And for
And
most
that could be a
brands,
negative brand impact
totally.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. And for most people, like advertising is actually the only way they experience a brand.
Mhm.
Like so if you have 999,000 variants on their way to the one good one, there's a lot of people out there that are getting a suboptimal experience of your brand.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can have the coolest restaurant in the world, but if you make your, customers slog through a mile of mud to get there, nobody's going to want to eat there, right? So it's the
yeah,
same kind of idea as if they're seeing an exposure to like what you mentioned earlier, either the same kind of you take a step back and all the ads look the same amongst competitors, or if they're a bunch of ads that don't resonate with them at best, at worst annoy them to have to keep seeing the feed. Right? That creates a negative brand image.
absolutely. And so where this is becoming really interesting, and this is I think why everyone here around Vidmob is so excited these days is it's like a whole new universe now in kind of like a post MCP world.
Mhm. Yeah.
Where and this is the reason why 3 years ago we sort of changed the kind of brand position of Vidmob, and we didn't change the name of the company, but we changed for like the subline. It was like Vidmob, the creative data company, and the idea was like how do we sort of have kind of like a 5-hour energy type simplicity in the messaging around who and what we are, and our view is that you know basically every marketer is going to adopt AI throughout their entire marketing workflow. Like I think that's pretty
Mhm.
safe to say. And it's going to impact everything. It's going to be driving. We're going to have agents to help with planning and strategy. We're going to be using all sorts of Gen AI tools to help with production. We're going to have AI automating media decisioning. We're going to using it to do advanced measurement and reporting like across the spectrum. But what we see is that the models, those are actually kind of commodities. They're incredible.
Mhm.
But if Coke and Pepsi are using the same tool, then it's not possible for it to be an advantage for one. Um, but the like the data that you put into them is where advantage lies.
Yeah.
And if one of those, if one company is able to connect their highly structured and robust creative data into an LLM and the other doesn't, the difference in what you're able to like answer and drive as actions is like nearly infinite.
Yeah.
Um, and so, like we just rolled out our MCP about a month ago, and just seeing what people are able to now like build and connect, and not in the matter of like months or like we used to, but in the matter of like single questions, basically.
Mhm.
It's pretty awesome.
Wow. Yeah, that does sound amazing. Let me ask you a question. So we talk a lot, we talked a lot about, utilizing AI from start to finish on the creative side, from, analyzing what works, analyzing what you have out there, and then kind of going through to some of the mistakes that people are making with AI creation for ad campaigns. Where do you think human oversight should remain non-negotiable in the marketing process, specifically on the ad side?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like the way I've been sort of thinking about it is well, and I guess there's a few pieces there, right? There's
Yeah,
sort of the obviously there's an entire kind of workflow, and within there you have like creative and media and measurement analytics. There's all sorts of like key like kind of skills there. But let's start with like the creative itself. I think there's sort of like the construction of the like brand platform and idea that is going to sort of like form the basis of like customer relationships. So like the Coke and a smile, or the Snickers, you're not you and you're hungry, or
yeah,
Wendy's, where's the beef, or like Dove Beauty, or like all of those things are incredibly powerful, and I think there has to remain a lot of human involvement there. When you then get into the like sort of some of the tactics of how those assets work hardest within a specific format or platform, there I think AI is going to be very effective.
mhm,
And when you get those things working in coordination, um, it's very powerful. When you try to go all the way, you know, and have AI doing the big idea, and it tends to move towards the center. You tend to get these like relatively generic things, um, and I just think like the human brain, we're going to get really good as a species of just basically not seeing these things.
Yeah,
Like
I think so too.
if something's not interesting and memorable, like it's literally never going to register in your mind in any way.
Yeah, and I think that that already exists to an extent. I mean, you know, I was sitting in the hotel room last night before going to bed, just scrolling through Facebook. I couldn't tell you any of the ads I saw. Couldn't remember a single one, right? And part of that is because none of them, you know, made a connection with me, right? None of them were stopped me scrolling and really had that hook. And I think you're right. If brands are utilizing LLMs, they are going to be for, start to finish, they are going to be dragged towards the center, right?
Yep.
Because they're all going to be utilizing, the same kind of core of data that informs the LLMs that helps kind of, inform the choices that it makes and the recommendations it makes. So I think that's, very, very pertinent. And having somebody, I'm no brand marketer by any means, right? Like I came up in the world through organic, but having some, really strong brand marketers that can help develop some of those things, like the Snickers, "You're not you when you're hungry," those campaigns. That's what stands out to people. To your point, and having somebody to be able to do that, backing it up with the efficiency of everything we can now do with AI and all the learnings we can make through utilizing AI, like you guys have built with Vidmob, is I think going to be the winning recipe.
Yeah, and then when you couple that with performance marketing,
Mhm.
that combination is incredibly effective, right?
Yeah.
Then you can drive people to do like add to carts and all sorts of
Mhm.
things that
Yeah.
they're really going to drive business. Um,
Yeah.
so, and I think it, similarly on the media side, like I think we're going to see more and more of that be automated. One of the things we were demoing this week was you know, connecting sort of for the creative scoring all the way through to media decisioning, and in the case of the Kroger thing I mentioned, like the idea that, like, you can understand the difference between low and high scoring creative, and then quickly look and see how your dollars are allocated against low and high. Well, the next step is would be pretty obviously to then rebalance that automatically and move dollars towards the better performing creative. And so I think that's going to get pretty heavily automated as well.
Yeah. I think that makes a ton of sense. Let me ask you another question. Uh, you guys, with what you do in analyzing so much content at scale, what signals have you seen, or common signals have you seen, that tells you that a company has become overly reliant on utilizing, AI and creative, and they don't have that human oversight. They don't have that kind of focus on differentiation going into it.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, and I think it does vary based on sort of like the creative strategy of the brand. Like I think there's sort of interesting variances in how AI can be utilized if you're using kind of more like animated or things like that versus sort of like sort of more like sort of human led creative.
Mhm.
So I think the first thing is just being able to like benchmark someone's performance against this sort of the platform norms or category norms, and then sort of getting signal like how are you doing? Like if you're a CPG marketer and you're adopting and using technology and sort of figuring this stuff out, it helps to just sort of know like, all right, well, how do I sort of fit in the category? Am I sort of on par with people out there generally doing fairly well? Like am I like ahead of the pack, or am I well under? That then enables people to like ask questions about sort of like why. Like, what's leading to this 20% underperformance, and is it because I don't have enough like creative variance, or the things I'm doing like aren't sort of uniquely using the brand assets that we have, and so we definitely do a fair amount of analysis there to help people understand um, are they achieving what they want to achieve? And then we can kind of layer in like, all right, well, is that because of an over reliance, or it could be sort of an underutilization of AI optimization?
Interesting. Um, I've got a few more questions I want to shoot your way, and then we have a section called Hot Takes where we kind of
Oh, nice.
see if you agree or disagree with certain things. Um, One question. This is kind of selfishly for my own edification, and for hopefully improving our own ad campaigns. What are some of the highest performing creative trends you're seeing right now?
Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, I think we're definitely seeing a lot of kind of lo-fi, um, you know, UGC style,
Yeah,
more kind of like authentic feeling messaging. It just as a broad generalization, it's tending to perform better in a lot of
it
cases.
makes
We see that
sense too.
fairly
Yeah,
consistent. But I think it also, there's a challenge there where, like if you turn over creative to, thousands of people who are probably less connected to your brand success than you are, I think the challenge is how do you do so in a way where now that body of creators, the let's just
hmm
say like 5,000 people are creating something that actually like ladders up to a singular idea.
yeah,
And you mentioned I'm on the Meta Global Creative Council. Meta's the head of the Creative Shop, Jimmy Stone, talks a lot about this idea of like compound branding,
hmm
and the essence of the idea is that when you sort of fragment your communications into like sort of the million points of light, that can be either a disaster or an incredibly powerful strategy, but it depends on how um, thematically connected they are. If it's all going and working in different directions, just imagine a million people on a project team all working in different directions.
yeah.
Like you're not going to get it done. But if it has like a cohesive structure, it's telling one story, then that creates a memorable experience, even though the things may not look the same. So that's definitely one is like UGC and UGC that is coordinated, not necessarily looking the same,
hmm
tending to lead to a consistent result.
That's interesting. So, UGC is something we've been exploring a little bit recently. We, for my audience will know this, but we created a tool called NextNet AI, Get NextNet AI. If getnextnet.ai, if anybody wants to check it out. Um, and this tool is, primarily AI search tracking, strategy creation, and influencing. Right? It's backed by our suite of agencies where we can help fulfill and do all this really cool stuff. Part of what we came across while we were building this, tracking AI search citations, was we saw this full breakdown that we built in of YouTube and different creators that were being cited. So we figured out through this process, like, hey, this is actually a really powerful tool for UGC to be able to go in and say, hey, here are the top 50 creators that are being cited by AI search, right? Whether that's LLM or ChatGPT or Gemini, whatever it would be. um, and being able to see okay, here's the content they're creating, here's the style they do, and be able to help kind of like boil that down into, here are ones that we feel like would represent the brand in a cohesive way. Here are ones that wouldn't, and being
Yep.
able to do that in the view of specifically ones that the content is getting cited by AI search frequently, uh, is something that was really cool. And it was like a byproduct of what we were building, right? Like we stumbled across it and we're like, hold on, this has a lot of like big implications for UGC. So UGC is not something I've done a lot in my career. So it's something that we're just really digging into now, utilizing that to then help kind of have like the double-edged sword of, can we leverage these creators to talk about our brand and our positioning and kind of follow that, as well as byproduct get picked up in AI search. So it's something we're starting to test, which is really exciting. But I think UGC has that now that I've done the sales pitch, I think UGC is really interesting in that it's the zig when everybody else zags, right? So much of the market is going towards AI led creatives and the videos and things along those lines that having that again, just human connection of UGC, and obviously there's the benefits of they have their own captive audiences and things along those lines, but having that and being able to use that in your ad campaigns is pretty strong, pretty interesting.
But there's a couple pieces to it. One is, I think, as a we talked about sort of like transitional nature of culture. Like that's definitely an area where things are going to move like probably faster than anywhere else. So
Yeah.
it's going to be incumbent on brands to figure out how they instrument through creative data systems like Vidmob or others, so that you don't want to be a month late to a creative trend in sort of like UGC or creator style
Yeah,
content, because
absolutely.
that can be like quite damaging to a brand.
Mhm.
Um,
You look
and
disconnected. You look like especially if you're targeting to a younger generation, you look like your parents who are always late to the newest slang or the newest, trend. So
yeah, and exactly. And I do worry also, like, I mean, we're definitely starting to see like a rise of kind of like synthetic influencer content, where you
yeah.
have because the reality now. I mean, I think actually a day or two ago there was an article in the New York Times about this. Um, it is now very easy to create you know influencer looking assets that
Hmm. Yep.
aren't real people, and you just like scrape Reddit or something to figure out what people are talking about, and have that lead to script generation, to generate characters. Like you can get incredible looking stuff, and it's I think actually being pretty performant now.
Hmm.
But as soon as like anything that lies on their that rests on the assumption that consumers are stupid, I think is a bad assumption.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
And,
so
and
too.
so as people start to realize that more and more of this stuff is is actually like the opposite, is the 100% opposite of authentic. Um, that's going to have an impact on the ability to drive results there as well. So I think there's certainly watch outs on the horizon for
Yeah,
that type of content as well.
absolutely. And I think those are all very valid points. Um, because we are running low on time, I would like to jump to the hot takes questions. So I'll ask you, if you agree or disagree with the statements that we're taking. So first one, most brands are optimizing for content volume when they should be optimizing for creative quality. Do you agree or disagree?
Agree.
Yeah, it's definitely, something we talked about earlier, probably, stole some of the thunder of the first hot take question, but
I mean, I think that there is definitely a question about what is quality. Like
mhm,
quality can be sort of like artistic integrity and that, or it can be sort of performance.
performance, yeah,
But but I do think there is a general underinvestment of time and technology in creative as the lever for driving performance.
agree, 100%. Next one, AI won't replace creative teams, but creative teams that use AI will replace those that don't.
Yeah, I mean, generally, yes. I do think you're going to have creative teams that do incredible work,
Mhm.
and are either like at some point that's going to start to really stand out again, and so I think there will be a bit of a pendulum. But in general, um, if you were someone who decided you're not going to use like Adobe tooling and creative over the last 10, 15 years, that probably didn't help your career.
Yeah,
And
probably not.
if you're sort of saying, hey, I'm not going to use AI to you know be sort of a better creator, it's just a useful tool that should help any creative team be more effective.
Yeah, got it. The biggest risk of AI in marketing is mediocrity.
I think that's right. I mean, I think that there certainly is like risk about like kind of catastrophic risk of some sort of like bad asset going out that like materially damages your brand, and then sort of like a new version of brand safety kind of.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that's going to be like the more like flashy thing. The sort of silent killer is going to be just like the move towards mediocrity that's going to
Yeah.
slowly erode brand and sort of brand resonance. So and that's, I think, going to be more impactful.
Yeah, and I think that connects to some of the conversation we had earlier of, you know, having that human-led, kind of brand focus is so important, to avoid that kind of, shift towards the middle.
Yeah, because I think like the safety side, like we and others, like we're sort of building tools now to be able to like sort of score and all sort of even like generated content, and you can score it against sort of brand mandatories and certain governance conditions and safety. Like that stuff can all be pre-built, and so I think we'll be able to like generally protect in that, but it's more difficult to protect against like sort of mediocre stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too, and I think that's like you said, it's a silent killer. It's a death by a thousand cuts that you don't realize you're getting. Um,
Yeah, and that's the thing people try to say is that like AI is making mediocrity free.
yeah, exactly. Last hot take, the future competitive advantage won't be on generating content, it's knowing what content deserves to exist.
100%. The thing I would actually add to that though is knowing what content not to make too,
Mm,
because I do think it's um, it, we are entering this world where you can make anything, right? And so knowing what to make and what not is the key. Um, Absolutely.
yeah, I 100% agree on that. I think that's something that, you know, is I think a lot of marketers are gonna learn that the hard way.
I mean, I think this sort of gets to like kind of like the big picture, like the way we kind of look at it is that like the last 15 years have been you know people built first party sort of identity and audience data, and then use that to develop custom audiences and all the things and that has been an incredible boon to effectiveness. But if you think of that in an S curve, that S curve is sort of reaching maturity, and we hear it through like Google and Meta and platforms.
Mhm.
It's just that like it's not that it's not valuable. It's just that when you focus relentlessly on something for over a decade, like eventually the gains are smaller.
Mhm.
We think
Yeah.
that essentially like the next chapter is basically, if that was all about identity data leading to media optimization, the next chapter is going to be sort of like the building and construction of creative data and using that for creative optimization. And if creative has been sort of 50 to 70% of results, then this second chapter should actually be more impactful than the first.
Yeah, absolutely. So closing question, and thank you again, Alex, for your time. But last question, I promise. Uh, if we have this conversation again, 3 years from now, what's the biggest change in AI driven marketing that you think will happen between now and then?
I think you're going to, we're going to move from sort of like disconnected silos. Creative teams over here that don't see performance. Media teams over here that don't really care about creative. Analytics teams that are sort of separate, and like I think everything's going to get connected, and not just the sort of workflow within a marketer, but like all of their vendors are gonna be connecting, and
Mhm.
so the move, the transition is going to be towards like highly coordinated, holistic workflows that run off of like basically like a small number of kind of like golden data sets that
Yeah.
are agreed upon across those different silos. So it's not like you have a different data set for your media team than from your creative team than from your, it's just sort of so, and that's going to be, I think, fairly um, impactful,
Yeah.
um, and that it's going to come faster than I think people realize.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. That's definitely, that interconnectedness of teams and of different, departments is going to be so incredibly important, and it's going to become easier and easier to kind of have that all connected.
I was like, it kind of has to be connected, right? Because
Yeah,
in an AI world, if you don't close the loop, it can't learn and it can't improve. Uh,
yeah,
and so everything has to be about closing loops.
hmm
And you can't have those things looping in silos.
yeah. I agree 100%. Alex, we're coming up on time. I want to say, thank you again so much for joining us today. I really appreciated having you on the show. It was great getting a chance to talk to you and kind of go through what you're doing over at Vidmob, and all the things that you're seeing with AI and marketing. So before we close out, I always like to give our guests opportunity to, kind of do the shameless plug, shout out, their LinkedIn or their website or anything that they're working on. So please, feel free, let us know what you're passionate about, what you're focused on, and where people can find you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess these days we're passionate about helping people sort of build this new sort of data asset and then instrument it across the tooling that they're building. So if anyone's interested in that, vidmob.com is a good place to start. We're active across LinkedIn and all the sort of traditional channels, and we'd certainly love to talk to anyone who wants to learn more about this.
Awesome. And then, my own shameless plug, getnextnet.ai, platform focused on tracking, strategizing around, and influencing AI search. Feel free to check it out. It's what we're passionate about here. It's what I am, on the opposite side of the fence from you, Alex, on the organic side. Uh, so, thank you again so much. Everybody that's listening, if you like this episode, make sure to follow us, leave a review. And as always, please comment on whatever platform you're watching this on: YouTube, Spotify, Apple, whatever it is. And please comment on the topics you'd like us to cover. It helps us source amazing guests like Alex here, and it helps us kind of plan the direction of the podcast to meet all your needs. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you again, Alex, so much, and we'll see you all next time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.